look, the complicated thing about learning to be a conductor is that really your best practice happens when you're in front of an ensemble. And it can be very difficult to get an ensemble together to practice for, right? Because by the time you're in front of an ensemble, you've been hired to conduct that ensemble. So like a university space is great, especially if there is like a lab orchestra or an orchestra set aside for conducting students, that can be really helpful. The interesting thing is that so often those orchestras are very small. So often that experience is like a couple pianos and a string quartet. And conducting a chamber orchestra is a much different experience than conducting a 70-person orchestra. The reaction time is so much slower from a large orchestra because there's so many more voices that have to play together. So it's interesting, that experience of conducting a lab orchestra, particularly in university. When you're conducting a lab orchestra, these are all players generally that know each other and play with each other really well. And everybody in the conducting class has all done Beethoven 5 at some point. So the lab orchestra can all pretty much play Beethoven 5 without you there as the conductor. So it can be a very interesting thing because some lab orchestras are very well trained to follow the conductor no matter what. But, for some of them, it's 9 o'clock in the morning and, you're a little bit on autopilot as a player and you just show up and play, which can make the conducting student feel better than they are, because the orchestra may not be responding exactly with their gesture. But it's a very complicated, tricky way to gain experience, because you can only gain experience really by like being in front of an ensemble. So that means that as a young conductor, especially, you're really at the mercy of the grace and kindness of your orchestras, because very much you're in these high pressure situations where they have to make in the moment decisions as to whether they're going to follow you and go with something that they think might not be correct, or whether they're going to save you, and chalk it up to your lack of experience. But it's very much, it's not like playing the viola. Like I can spend the majority of my day practicing and learning the piece, and then in the moment you make a few adjustments when you're in the group, but as a conductor you make the majority of your adjustments when you're in front of the group.
Wow, that sounds fascinating. So interesting.
Yeah, it's a complicated thing, but yeah.
And what exactly do you do with your hands? Like for those who don't know anything about conducting at all.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's another, you can do whatever you want with your hands. The whole point is ideally that you're using your body to communicate both the style and speed and sort of feeling of the music all at once, right? And ideally you're making that as efficient as possible to give the players just enough of what they need. Because as soon as you start getting to as soon as you get into the player's way, or as soon as the players start to feel that the information you're giving them is counter to what they're expecting or what they need, they will pull away from you and just manage it all within themselves. Because we're all trained as chamber musicians as well as instrumentalists, so we are all capable of playing together without the conductor there. So I really think of, in theater it's a bit different, right? So in theater, my role is to sort of connect the stage and the orchestra, and often the orchestra can't see the stage and the stage can't see the orchestra, so it is sort of my responsibility to sort of bring those two together. But again, touring with Miss Saigon for 18 months, it was the same orchestra most of the time for those 18 months, so they knew the show, right? So the orchestra many times during the show could do the show without me. They don't necessarily need me there showing them where all the beats are. But it's all about communication. So again, part of it is your hands are showing, when the music starts and stops, and you're showing style and articulation and things within your gesture to help the orchestra figure it out. I think honestly, 99% of what a conductor does in the moment is just efficiency. I mean, you could have the orchestra, the 70-piece orchestra could 100% conduct themselves. But in a rehearsal setting, rehearsal would take longer because they would have a lot more opinions and needs that would take more time to figure out, where the conductor ideally has everyone's parts in front of them and knows and can troubleshoot a lot faster. So I think in many cases, the conductor was sort of born out of a need for, efficiency in communication and efficiency in rehearsal times. So I think that's a lot of what the conductor does. A lot of the conductor's job is just to help everyone communicate faster, and get through the piece in a way that is as efficient as possible. I mean, you mentioned in your email before this about watching a video of Leonard Bernstein where he seems to not move his hands at all. And that's a very powerful thing that a conductor can do, right? He's giving the responsibility over to the orchestra 100%. And he knows in that moment that they don't need him to be dictating the tempo. They don't need him in that moment. I think of, where's that example? It's that example of him conducting the Candide overture, where he just sort of stops and just like dances on the podium. And it's perfect, because in that moment, the orchestra doesn't need anyone to give time. They just need the conductor to get out of their way and just enjoy himself. And that's exactly what happens. But that also comes with a great deal of understanding and trust between whoever's on the podium and the ensemble.